All right. Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Nathan Hahn. I'm from an organization called TerraDAP based here in Washington in the Seattle area. And then I guess, Greer, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I did this morning, but I will again for those who
Okay.
weren't here. My name's Greer Mayer, and I'm the science coordinator with Governor Salmon Landscapes. And I'll explain a little more how Nathan and I connected. Unless you're going to do that, Nathan, but one way or another, we'll get color splitting.
Yeah, I think. Do you want to take it away? I think you're the first lines
Oh,
here.
good. Yeah, go
Yeah.
ahead. That's the slide. Well, here, why don't you tell this part? Because this actually is this sort of an origin story for both this project, but also my relationship to it. So Nathan, do you want to tell the story of the Cascadia Partner Forum, and then I'll tee up how I got involved?
Yeah. So I guess going back a few years, I guess the Cascadia Partner Forum is kind of a transboundary group of wildlife and conservation professionals, kind of a mix of state agency folks. For the BC side, there's people from the various ministries, and then folks like Greg and myself, and it kind of with the shared goal of just collaborating and talking and trying to conduct like joint assessment and monitoring where possible across that transboundary region of Washington and then southern British Columbia. There's a lot of species that go back and forth across that border. There's species like grizzly bear where we're talking about reintroductions in the on the U.S. side, and they're already on the BC side. And then for salmon, we have obviously have the Columbia River, and salmon going across that border. So um, that's kind of the Cascadia Partner Forum. TerraDAP was actually started out of this group, so we have like a strong connection to the Cascadia Partner Forum, with the idea that it could be a tool to help conduct that joint monitoring. A lot of data sets don't span the border; they stop at the U.S. border, or they stop at the Canada border from the Canada side. So there's kind of a need to look at like what the landscape's doing across a much larger area. And so um, that's how the salmon work came about. There was this blueprint for resilient Cascadia that Greer was involved in writing, and the salmon team on that report really identified this need to understand how and where terrestrial habitat for salmon is changing, to support this concept of ridgetop to river management. And we received some funding from the forum, and from the Wilberforce Foundation to try and tackle this with all the data sets that TerraDAP had already built for other species monitoring efforts. Um, Really, this goal of like telling the story of landscape change and loss within critical salmon watersheds in Cascadia. Greer, did you want to add anything there?
Yeah, no, that's great. I'll just say that I definitely was involved through the Cascadia Partner Forum, and then also sort of hands-on was involved in using Pterodop in a sort of real-world planning environment through the Eastern Washington Shrub Step Initiative, where it was like a case study of how you could take the data and sort of plug it into monitoring and adaptive management that's tied to decisions around restoration. And that was for different species in some way, although we did have sort of wetland riparian change associated with it, but I saw a ton of potential. So I was excited to get involved with developing this tool out and seeing if we could make it work to tell the story of what I'll talk about, which is landscape scale change, which is intricately tied to in-stream habitat for salmon. And there's a ton of literature about the link between land use change and in-stream habitat conditions, and to some extent, salmon population metrics themselves. There's not a lot of data though, and I would argue there's even more research needed to tie this together. And one of the analysis questions we're trying to tackle with our IMW is to even look further into this, because anecdotally, a lot of the changes they saw across those 30-year studies were tied to historic land use practices and current land use practices going on in the watershed, like timber harvest and fire. You can go to the next slide, please. And urban development, obviously. I'll just mention the other tie to the work that PNAMP does, as well as the state, that this is land use, land cover is a high level indicator for PNAMP, as well as other groups like myself, state of Washington. But I would argue it's hard to get consistent, reliable data. there's a lot of one-off maps that have been developed, and then some products that are changing less rapidly than what we're going to talk about and don't necessarily have the right land use classes, or in the case of the NOAA Coastal Atlas, they've lost funding, so they're not doing it anymore. So it's kind of like hard to find exactly the right tool set. And I think this tool that we're going to talk about has a unique opportunity to be more catered to our needs, and we can be more tied to its future than some of the other ones that we tend to rely on. And I think there's some cool things we were able to do with it. You can go to the next slide, Nathan. Here we go. Yeah, we got consistent long-term data sets on land use change with particular attributes tied to salmon habitat, which was one of the outcomes of this, was to think about what attributes of land use change we were interested in and what sort of boundaries we wanted to put around changes in data. We'll talk to, go ahead. How many more I have left? I think then
This is the last one, I think.
This is the last one. Okay. And then I'm going to give Nathan all the detailed slides. But the idea that we used was Nathan reached out. We developed a technical team, including our science advisory panel. So Bob Philby, Pete Bisson, Michael Waite, Jeanette Smith, Tracy Hillman, and Ken Kearns from Virtual. Some of them, not all of them, were involved in the advisory group. Obviously, Bob and Pete were great resources given their history and understanding land use change in forestry and impacts on industry conditions. But there are a lot of existing Terradapt models and tools that which Nathan will describe, that take the data, interpret it, and create land use classifications. So we're really leveraging those. A lot of them work great for us. And then we just had to tweak some of it and create some polygons. Ultimately, we were trying to input relationships between these land use change or attributes and salmon population numbers, but that got a little more tenuous, and I think was more of a research type question that could be pursued. So we focused more on land use change. And here are sort of the attributes. We were looking at both watersheds and floodplains, and so those were sort of our spatial units. We had watersheds, and then we had floodplain polygons, which included riparian areas too. We decided to just forego the discussion around floodplain polygons and just use floodplains, and so it's pretty close. But looking at land cover, forest structure, forest disturbance, vegetation, habitat conversion, floodplain condition, watershed condition, and there's a lot more detail to these that Nathan's going to describe. But these are sort of the high level metrics that we were generating, and he's going to show you how cool it is because it gets updated annually and you can easily access the data and export it. Go ahead, Nathan.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. So I thought it would be a good idea to share. I'm assuming almost all of you haven't heard about Terradapt, so I wanted to just talk about generally like what we do and how we build these landscape models, and then I'll talk about how we applied them to salmon and develop that framework. So as I said before, this group came out of this transboundary joint monitoring project, the Cascadia Partner Forum, and so we're really focused on like large landscape scale conservation planning. Large land. This is the Cascadia region that we're talking about, that we're modeling. So it's all of Washington, but it goes into Idaho and Montana. It goes up into southern BC and just down across the Columbia River into Oregon. And our basic approach here is taking environmental metrics and data sets that are dynamic in time, so that a lot of that means remote sensing data and Landsat data that goes back to 1985, and we get regular imagery updates. We also bring in like topography information, hydrology, climate data, soils data, protected areas, and then transportation. Roads are a big piece of this, and we use all of those layers to monitor across those large time scales. So when you have that data spanning a lot of time, you can monitor status and trends across years, and then also looking at future impacts, especially using those climate layers and projecting out into the future. and then obviously all that data is great, but we also want to build tools that let us do spatial analysis. We want to be able to develop spatial priorities on top of those layers, so you can see you can define spatial priorities, but then also track change within those priority areas over time, where you seeing forest fires, urbanization, any forest loss, any of those trends happening within your priority areas are important to monitor. And then a big part of what we do is these visualization tools as well. So making it easy to access and view that data and look at this, those stacks of layers over time and assess those trends in a user-friendly way, or hopefully user-friendly way. So some of the work that we've done in Cascadia, a whole range of work. We really try and do like co-development of these products. So we're not building them for ourselves, we're building them for partners who are going to take them and apply them. So just some examples here. The land cover layer and the forest structure layers were really developed for Washington DNR to do forest trends monitoring across time. So being able to see where's logging happening, how is the forest changing over time was a really important question for them, and so that kind of drove the development of those two layers, which are also really important for our salmon work. Developed species models like the grizzly habitat model, and done some work with First Nations in BC, like the Lower Similkameen Indian Band, to look at how fire and logging is affecting grizzly habitat suitability in their IPCA area. Recently, we just completed a large set of analyses for Washington Fish and Wildlife for their connectivity action plan, and looking at ecosystem level connectivity across Washington State, and doing that with our dynamic data so they can continue to track those, how that's changing within the corridors that they developed or identified in the action plan. And then, as Greer mentioned, this Washington Shrub Resiliency Initiative, using basically identifying these spatial priority areas, cores and corridors and areas for potential growth. And then we can use the dynamic layers to look at where those are, how it's changing within those spatial priorities. Okay, so getting to salmon, which I think is what you all are here for. So for this project, I think Greer kind of had a nice overview already, but our objectives were really to leverage all these existing Teradap layers to build a specific salmon-specific monitoring framework, and then also just expanding access to these data sets and landscape indicators of pressure and resilience for salmon. And this was this is a Cascadia area, but then we brought in, there's a Washington SWFT database, and BC has zones of influence polygons. So these were kind of defining the area that we're really interested in across Cascadia. These are the salmon landscapes that we're talking about. And some of the questions, there's obviously lots of questions that our group identified, but I think most of them revolved around these three. So what's the current status of terrestrial conditions, and then how are those conditions changing over time, and then where are the largest threats to habitat based on what we're seeing. And then in terms of insights, we wanted to build a standalone a web app to explore all this data with all the salmon distribution data in there as well, so you can look at trends in watersheds and at that pixel level. And so the framework that we came up with, there's a lot of different layers involved here, but the framework that we came up with was trying to group these into some buckets that made sense for salmon. So obviously the floodplain and riparian area, like within that area, we're interested in wetland extent, the connectivity within the floodplain. I think we used from PSC vital signs, just like a connectivity metric, canopy cover, and tree diameter within the floodplain, surface, and then surface hardening and road density. This is an animation of our land cover layer. It's 20 classes, but this is up in the like, Gray, do you remember the name of this river? I'm
Yeah, it's in
blanking
the
on the name.
Everett area.
Yeah, yeah. There is a some wetland, some restoration of, or I guess levees were taken out to try and restore like a saltwater emergent wetland, and so this is an animation of our land cover layer. The gray pixels are saltwater emergent wetland, and the teal is freshwater emergent. And you can see as they take those levees out, it's capturing that change back from freshwater to saltwater emergent. And then you can also see tons of urban. The red is urban pixels, so it's also, you can really, this is 1985 to 2024, so this is picking up like lots of urban expansion as well in the area.
Before you go on, Nathan, I think that it's on one key thing I wanted to use this for as we moved on was, just for instance, in estuaries or any floodplain area, we have a lot of conversion from ag to urban development. And as you know, as soon as it becomes urban, it's a lot harder to restore. So telling that story of where we had rapid change in the environment and key salmon habitats, this is a really helpful way to both visualize it for whoever you're trying to communicate with, but also pull data on the rate of change and the scale of change, which for someone putting in an application for a protection project, you don't always have real numbers from, but this would be a great source of information to talk about the rates of change within the area you're trying to protect. Anyway, that's just a good example we have on the screen. Go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. And we can look at that not just within the floodplain, but also across the whole watershed. I think this is also up in the Everett area, and like some large expansion of urban development across that watershed. And then and then for forest condition, we can look at just forest extent from our land cover layer. You can get this is tree, this is canopy cover, so you can see logging happening. This is in the Skagit Valley, so you can see logging happening, and then for it, even tracking that forest recovery as it comes back a bit. And it's also, I love these animations because you can even see like a little bit of the stream meandering in here even. And again, these are all like 1985 to 2024 animations. And then the last thing that we wanted to do was take all of these different metrics and see if we could come up with a general like watershed condition score for salmon. I think we have at least a draft with our co-development team. I think there's definitely room for improvement here, but basically taking these three buckets and combining it into one single score or index that can kind of track general conditions over time. So this is another good example of just using these individual indicators over time and in different watersheds. So I just pulled, these are just 4 different watersheds with different types of disturbance or not changes going on across our time series. So the dark green is up here in Olympic National Forest. It's like in the Keats, on the Keats River. This is old growth forest. We can look at, this is, so on these panel plots, the LC is land cover, the forest land cover, and then here the y-axis is the percent of the watershed that's in that land cover type. So obviously in this watershed, we've got, almost 90% of the watershed is forest through time. And then we can see down here, there's a fire in the 2010s, and a little drop in forest cover there. The lighter green is again on the peninsula, but this is an area that was in the Northwest Forest Plan was reclassified to a recovery region. So logging was basically stopped in that watershed. And looking over time, you can see this, just a big recovery of forest, and then the like mesic vegetation kind of declining as well. And then yellow is where is a watershed where harvest is continually taking place. So you can see in the in terms of forest harvest, the percent of the watershed that's getting harvested is kind of um, high here and then drops off a bit, and you can see that reflected in both in forest cover and canopy cover. Um, and then obviously those things bounce back, but canopy height does not bounce back nearly as quickly. And then in the red is urbanization, and you can see like a high increase in urbanization, and that is really that, as Greer was saying, those are generally permanent conversions, and so we don't see any bounce back from that. But this is just I like these. Just looking at these time series, you can kind of get a sense of the level of detail you get when you can look annually again and again at the same watershed, and kind of what these land cover layers are able to pick up at the watershed level. Another thing that we can do with this data is just animate it over time. I think this is a really effective way to show how much change is happening. So this is canopy height across kind of the Puget Sound Peninsula area, and all of this logging going on. It's particularly when it resets back to 1985, you can really notice how much has changed here. But you can also see this was that recovery watershed. It actually is slowly improving over time as well. Let it reset once so you guys can see that. And then Greer was talking about the importance of floodplain monitoring. So we're still working on a good definition of what the floodplain is. Right now, it's using the U.S. Forest Service 50-year floodplain. But I think the nice thing about the app is that you can bring in new floodplain layers and not have to rerun every single layer. But we can look, at the pixel level. This is floodplain connectivity. So this is a Puget Sound vital signs indicator, and it's just the amount of natural land cover in the floodplain. And we can look at that like at the pixel level. You can summarize it within a watershed, all the floodplain area within a watershed, and look at change over time. I pulled a couple just across all of those salmon watersheds in Cascadia. Just pulled some stats on like area of net loss and gain for some of these land cover types. So somewhat of a decrease in floodplain wetland habitat. There's quite a big decrease in forest floodplain habitat. I think a lot of that was from actually up in BC and in kind of eastern Washington where the big forest fires occurred. Because a lot of that was just balanced out by gains in mesic vegetation, and that generally replaces it. But we also saw some big increases in urban land cover, and then a loss in agriculture, which kind of alludes to what Greer was talking about of replacement of ag with urban. So these are quick examples I pulled, but this is kind of the questions we can start to look at with this data. And then just briefly wanted to touch on, I mentioned that watershed condition index. So this is kind of where we ended up. Happy to talk more about the methods here, but I think they're still in development for the most part, thinking through how best to kind of consolidate all these different metrics. As Greer said, the science is maybe not quite there in terms of understanding how these indicators all come together and across this whole landscape to affect salmon habitat. But if we can also break them out into those three buckets of habitat conversion and forest condition and floodplain, and you can start to see this is change. The purple is a decrease in the condition, and the green is an increase. And you can start to see where in the landscape like habitat conversion is happening versus forest condition dropping. This is mainly from like big fires. And then floodplain, which kind of also aligns with habitat conversion. I think I'm not sure how much more time we have, but I did want to show you the actual like web app that you all can use to put this in the chat too. You can access it. This is still, we're still working on we've got like a web developer that's helping us improve all the features on this web app. So I'd still call it like a development version. Some of it can be buggy at times, but overall, like all the layers that we want to have in here are in here. And so the way I guess the general function is you can add a layer, and then you can also add an overlay. So we've got a lot of different watershed layers. We have estuaries in here, some planning like the recovery regions, and then different watersheds for specific species. And this is all pulling from that Swifty database and then the BC zones of influence. And then you can also add your own. If you have to log in, you can just create an account, and you can add your own layers as well. So specific watersheds or distributions that you're interested in. And then for the layers, we can add, to just do this one first, you can add any layer you want, and you'll get a time slider on the bottom here to pick the year that you want to look at. You can zoom in. There's like a cool 3D view. Just fun to look at. And then you can also, there's a bunch of different base maps up here. If you pick, let's see, we can, and we talked a lot about land cover, so you can look at the actual categorical classification, or you can look at, we can look at forest. So this is just a binary. Is it forest or not? And we can look at the status. So this is the current status in 2024. But then, another question is change. What's changing? So purple is loss and green is gain. And we're looking between 1984 and 2024. You can slide this wherever you want. So you can just look at the last kind of 14, 15 years. If you zoom in, I like this a lot too. If you right click, you'll get that time series plot, so you can see like when that change happened even, which is kind of cool. So this is, and then you can see where you're getting clear cuts coming back and clear cuts happening, and then floodplains is another bucket. So we just have the same, we just look at that same layer. It's that same layer, but it's just masked to the floodplains. And so that comes in handy if you want to ask questions about at the watershed level. We can look at Coho. This is Coho Huck 12 watersheds. And instead of summarizing by pixel, we can summarize by region. And this sometimes takes a while, but it'll basically show you the mean value just within the watershed. So we'll see if this loads in time, but this would basically be asking what's the percent of floodplains in a watershed that are in forest.
And you can download the data.
Yes, yeah, that was the last thing I didn't talk about.
Yeah, and you can also, and it's updated annually. Nathan, when is it usually updated? What's your schedule?
We're trying, so everything is reflective of July 1st of the current year. And our aim is to try and get it updated by the end of the year, or early in the next year. So we're working on 2025 data right now. So this should be coming in.
A lot better than the national recovery.
Yeah. And I think the processing time that it takes to keep things updated, we're talking a lot with Fish and Wildlife and DNR to see if we get service contracts to keep this, really make sure this stays updated well into the future. But yeah, if you're logged in, you can export data. It'll just send you a link to download when it's ready. We're working on more tools with data export, so you can upload like a whole shapefile of watersheds that you want to download data for, upload points and extract data from those points. And then you can also, if you want to animate a time series and record it or capture a screenshot, those are all there. And these links are, if you copy this link and send it to someone, they'll get the exact view that you're looking at. So we found those are useful for just like storytelling purposes.
You could upload a sort of a project polygon if it's sort of process based and trying to affect some of these more terrestrial, I guess, metrics. You could put it in here and then export change or look at it. So,
Yeah. Yeah, Dan, I think there's some folks at Fish and Wildlife that we've been working with. I think at first I was sending them what they were asking for, and now they're just getting it from here. So, yeah, I think
it's great
that's
to have a person, I'll say, working with Nathan and Andrew. It's just great to have a person at the end of the line here. You can engage them to make updates for this. I think we need to keep funding if we can, but it's not very expensive compared to some other tools that have been developed. So I think it's a great investment, and I can see it moving forward, continuing to closely. Yeah, go ahead, finish this out.
Oh yeah, no, that was a good transition, Griff. I thought I'd get back to the slides there. I think, yeah, as I mentioned, there's improvements to the portal and the spatial data coming this year. We're also really interested. I think this is a tool intended for practitioners, so we're really interested in hearing new ideas for layers or how to visualize them. One thing we are continually hearing is better like stream temp and stream flow information. I think that there does seem to be some methods emerging for doing that with remote sensed data. But there's also like a lot of models already out there that we can try and figure out how to import into this portal to access as well. We're working right now on building a similar tool set in California with California Department of Fish and Wildlife, which is exciting. And I think that group and our original group in Cascadia were both kind of interested in trying to figure out how to replicate like the NOAA ocean indicators and trends, but as like a terrestrial report card. So figuring out, we have a lot of indicators in here already. There's obviously that whole stream in-stream component that we're missing at the moment, but yeah, just trying to try and help plug in this data into like existing reporting needs and maybe some new reporting ideas. Yeah, that's what's next. We're, I guess, excited. A little bit like we're excited to hear any ideas you all have for where to take this or things you'd like to see in the app as you look through it.
Someone asked about California, Nathan. Is that all California or just part of California?
Yeah, the modeling boundary there is all of California and then up into the Klamath Basin. So it's quite a large area.
We've reached out to Oregon if you want to bridge the gap. It's a small investment.
Yeah. Yeah, we're actively trying to find partners in Oregon that would be interested in build. There's just going to be a clear, obvious gap between California and Washington, and we're interested from both the salmon side, the wildlife side, and the forestry side, all of it. So
yeah, salmon, covering all of salmon landscapes would be fun. Yeah, east on the west. Any question?
Who are you working with at CDFW?
Yeah, we've got a kind of whole team. Robin Belinsky is the CDFW lead that we're working with. But it's like a team of 10 that's co-developing that with us.
Oh, cool. But there's another project that we interact with at Klamath that they would probably find is really interesting to see, especially if they think it's going to, might be showing up in their neighborhood shortly. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And did you say that all the layers people can just download them and they're publicly shareable?
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, one of the bugs in the app is with with the downloading, so sometimes it doesn't work. But you can feel free to email me if you're trying to access a layer.
I'll definitely want to talk to Monica Diaz, because she's doing something with Salmon Data Discovery Tool that we're not synthesizing the data like you are with this tool, but there'd definitely be potential for you to leverage some of the content from her tool, or that her tool could draw more attention to yours, and that you guys are actually synthesizing it, which is really neat.
That would be great.
There you go. Sorry, beat you to it.
Yeah, I can reach out to her.
Great. Oh, that's really cool, Greg.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I've noticed with this too, I'll just point out one other cool thing about it. It's, I mean, 1984, I think that's the end time zone. It's not that far back, and obviously not as far back as we'd like to go, but way better than a lot of the other land use tools I've seen, where you get like 2020 or 2015, and you're like, oh, this is this sort of shifting. I worry about shifting baselines, because you look, a lot of change happens historically that I think is really impactful in the salmon watersheds, and just understanding that is super important to understanding what's going on in streaming. So I really appreciate not only that it's updated regularly, but also it goes way back in time. And the pixel size comes up a lot. I mean, there is things like high resolution change detection, which are much smaller pixels, but in my mind, you sort of substitute like annual updates at a lower cost over a longer time frame for a larger pixel, which to me, I think it's a meaningful pixel size for what we're trying to capture. So to me, the pixel size is not really a relevant sort of thing to this. I think it's the appropriate pixel size. And obviously, if you have smaller pixels, there's just more data, and it's not and maybe masks some of what's really going on. So pros and cons.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions for Nate or Greer?
And
Yeah, you'll have to come back and get a
research questions. I'd love to see some research projects like what we're doing in the IMW, where we try to tie some of these changes to long-term data sets on entry complexity and fluid sediment flow, temperature, all those things. I think would be really interesting.
I may have missed this, but did you mention too many of the champ data in there? The NOAA champ data, BPA from a while back?
We could, I mean, if someone wanted to, that would be a great resource for data. But so far, the only project I know of is pulling this in for IMW, which is the ecology EMAP protocols for that sort of data. But other data sets would be appropriate too. Be a great grad school project. Because that would help. What it is then that would help say, wood is highly influenced by this land use change, or, flow is obviously influenced. A lot of mainstream characteristics, but we don't quite understand those relationships. I kind of think it is like a sort of, you'd have to develop the relationship to know which ones you want to monitor, and how you come up with that watershed condition is highly dependent on how these things interact. Anyway, just a future. If the start was to get the data, which I'm so excited about, and hopefully make this more of a mainstream data product we can all use.
Yeah, very cool, Greer.
I'll pass it back to you. Listen to the questions.
Any other questions? Awesome. Thanks for bringing this to our attention, Greer. I think this could definitely pass this around a bit and get some other folks taking a look at it. Awesome, Nathan. Thank you so much.
It'd probably be good to do a PNAP newsletter blurb just to get it out further.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, also if you're interested in presenting at a conference in October.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Emerging Technologies Information Sessions.
It's nearby.
It is, it's in Washington, wouldn't have to leave the state.
I'll let you know about that, Nathan. Yeah, Yeah, we've been trying to do the road show because they need more funding to continue. Not a lot, but yeah. I've been trying to link in with funding sources to keep this going.
I can send you some information, Greer.
Great, thank you.